Good evening from Buckingham Palace. I'm Trevor Phillips and welcome to a Sky News Royal Special on the death of the Queen. Coming up in the next hour, tens of thousands of people of all ages and from all over the country make the pilgrimage to see the Queen lying in state. And here are the live pictures of that steady stream of people entering the Palace of Westminster. The long wait to say goodbye is getting longer. The Queen's queue now stretches almost 5 miles and is expected to take over 8 hours to complete. At Sandringham, while meeting mourners, Prince William opens up about how he felt walking behind the Queen's coffin as it left Buckingham Palace.
Doing the walk yesterday was challenging. Back a few memories.
An occasion like no other. Buckingham Palace releases more details of the Queen's state funeral, including a 2-minute national silence. And we take a look at the many ways Britain changed during the Elizabethan age. Good evening. The queue waiting patiently to say goodbye to Her Majesty is now almost 5 miles long and still growing. It's almost impossible to imagine this in any other country. But tonight, the global focus is on a custom we Brits have elevated to a high art, the queue. Nobody does it better. The public have been given no orders, there is no prescribed etiquette, yet in the midst of the pageantry, a popular ritual is evolving. Flowers at the gates, silence in the streets, broken only by ripples of applause. The royal walkabouts go on, with embraces and the quiet exchange of words between princes and the people. And in Westminster Hall, a stream of mourners, each paying their respects in their own special way. Also tonight, we know a bit more about the Queen's state funeral, which promises to be a national occasion, the like of which we have never seen before. We'll take you through all the details and speak to 2 people who will be there. Sky's Nick Martin has been speaking to people, paying their respects.
They're queuing around the clock now. Around 40,000 people, maybe more. It's a queue that's over 4 miles long.
Making sure that such a huge number of people can all get to see the Queen lying in state is proving to be a huge logistical effort. There are now more than 1,000 stewards and volunteers lining the route to make sure all of this can be achieved safely.
It's a case of eating and drinking on the move.
Well, I've got a vegetarian sandwich.
Oh, nice. What have you all
I've
been?
eaten my sandwiches already.
A bit early, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I know,
You've got quite a long way to go yet.
I'm moving.
I've eaten my sandwiches as well.
And along the route, a reminder of big royal occasions of the past. The events of the last few days, of course, now part of that history.
Good to see you're eating, we like that.
Oh, yeah.
Volunteers from St John Ambulance patrolled the route.
I've helped an elderly lady who was struggling on her feet to come along, and we gave her some paracetamol for a bit of pain relief to keep her moving. So whatever the public need to get their first aid from us, we're here for it.
Show your wristbands as you come along, thank you.
This is the first time experiencing such a queue. Never had it in the past 3 years in security, doing a lot of events, hundreds of events. This queue has been the longest, and it's just keep on coming.
Anyone for water?
You've got to sort of sustain yourself, haven't you? You've got to drink, you've got to eat.
That's it,
It's kind of a bit of a mission, this, isn't it?
It is a mission, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And, you know, you just know that it's going to be a magical moment in there, so...
Let me have a look at this. What, is this homemade?
It's a homemade ham sandwich.
Let's have a look. We want to see.
Oh my God,
that is a wonderful ham sandwich.
Yeah, that was made at 7 o'clock this morning.
One of the final legs of this queue moves down the Albert Embankment, past the hundreds of thousands of hearts that adorn the wall in memory of those who died in the COVID pandemic. Dara Leonard from the Red Cross has been offering emotional support to those who might need it.
At the core of all of this is bereavement and grief. And in some of those conversations, as they're talking, they then disclose about the death of a loved one, perhaps very recently, and perhaps, as you say, with the COVID wall down there, they're standing looking at it, and it may have been someone that has passed away very, very recently. And that's when we'll stop and we'll spend a moment.
And there'll be many more moments like that over the next 3 days as they queue to see the Queen. Nick Martin, Sky News, Central London.
We can speak now to the royal historian, Anthony Selden. Good evening, Anthony.
Good evening, Trevor.
It's been an extremely intense, emotional week since Her Majesty passed. Is it possible, and we haven't got to the climax, which is Monday yet.
No, we haven't.
Well, what do you think that is going to be like?
I think it's going to be like nothing that we've ever seen in our lifetimes, apart from those who perhaps are over 80, who were 10 at the time of George VI dying. The only thing that touches it will be the death, not of a monarch, but of Winston Churchill, who repeatedly comes up as the top or the favourite Prime Minister out of the 55 the country has seen. It will be enormous in terms of pomp and grandeur and history and uniform and jewellery and crowns and music and religion and faith, but also the fact that you got this gathering outside of the United Nations General Assembly every September, the biggest imaginable gathering of global leaders and people of eminence and power across the world. They all want to beat the path to Westminster Abbey on Monday. Even President Biden, still the most powerful man on earth, has managed to carve out 2 days from his diary to come across for this occasion.
I was really taken, Anthony, if I may say so, by your comparison with the Churchill state funeral, which actually I think is the last actual state funeral rather than the ceremonial one, which I'm old enough to remember. And I do remember the extraordinary emotional intensity. I don't know if you recall, there was a moment where one of the pallbearers, a young man, just staggered a little bit, and it felt like the whole nation took in its breath. Do you think that we're going to see a sort of emotional temperature of that level?
I do, and more in a way. I remember that the cranes, that the bowing down at the time. London was still much more of an active port, and that was one of those memories. And the train carrying the coffin. I do. I mean, it's different. Churchill was so associated with the Second World War, on the hopes of the nation when this nation stood up, and it seemed for several months that Germany would prevail against this country. Churchill's will and his speeches managed to give heart to the country. So enormous emotional investment in him. But the pictures we've just seen of the wall, almost a half as many people died during the COVID epidemic as during the Second World War. So, there's a sense that she saw this country, the Queen, late Queen, through a period of enormous national grief and bafflement when people were frightened and worried. And it was the Queen, more than the Prime Minister, who found the words consoling the nation, and significantly with words echoing back to Vera Lynn in the Second World War of "we will meet again." She was giving confidence. So people have so many memories going back all their lives, and their parents' lives and grandparents' lives, of this woman who has measured out family life like a clock, ticking like a heartbeat, particularly at the great moments.
Anthony, thank you very much indeed. I know you will be with us, I think, on that occasion. I can't say we look forward to it, but we will anticipate.
Thank you.
Sky's Matthew Thompson is near the back of the queue, and we can speak to him now. Matthew, let me first ask, how are you? And how long have you been
but,
there?
you know, in a good way. I think we're all... Well, this is day 2. This is about, I think we're 8 hours into it. We're certainly feeling it. I think yesterday we did something. What did we do? Something like 22,000 steps on the old pedometer. So we're certainly getting our exercise in, but it's all part of the experience. And actually, you've joined us, as you say, towards the back of the queue, but it's in this rather nondescript residential street, as you can see, because what's happening is the queue is essentially disintegrating, I think is a fair way to put it, isn't it? They had everyone bunched up at the back at Southwark Park, about maybe 10 minutes from here, where we were a second ago. But it's going so quickly. We found some people to speak to that as we've walked with them, we've now walked into the middle of this, as I say, rather nondescript residential area. So the queue is essentially turning into something more of a long walk, the 4 miles all the way to Westminster, because there's no queuing to speak of. It's just people starting at Southwark Park and then walking all the way to Westminster. And some people who've just started that rather long walk are going to join us now and explain to us why they've decided to make that long walk in the middle of the night on a I think Thursday evening. I'm losing track of time.
Thursday evening. It's to honour our great Queen for everything she's done for us and for the world. We have to remember her and honour her. And yeah, it's a memorable, historic moment for us as well.
Part of history, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the reason you've done it so late at night, presumably work commitments?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it just felt like we could do it with good friends and get the atmosphere. Also appreciate the people that can do it during the day, so it's also trying to find the right time for you. But it's been absolutely magical so far.
How long have you been in it so far, may I ask?
Nearly...
About an hour, I would say.
About an hour?
Yes.
Queuing back in the park?
Yeah.
And then weirdly, it's just sort of...
It's a very
stopped being a queue and started being a walk, isn't it? It's very strange.
I feel like I'm doing the midnight
I would
walk.
tell people to wear comfortable shoes if ever they're joining the queue on Saturday or Sunday.
Because you can't stop, so you can't bring seats or anything.
No,
because it's just moving the whole time.
Yes. I just want to tell them.
Very light bag.
Put it this way: have you set yourselves a cut-off time? And if you're still here,
No,
if you're still here at 3 in the morning, will you you'll stick it out
Yeah, we're sticking out
to the bitter end?
To the long haul. We're in it for the long haul. Absolutely.
Great, well, I better let you get on with your long walk. Enjoy yourselves. Good luck.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
So as you can see, what was a queue is fast becoming, as I said, more of a walk. And I suppose that's good news, because if you aren't thinking about joining the queue at this late hour, the point is that, yes, it may be on paper 4 miles long, but it's still only about 8 hours, not the horror stories we were anticipating. The government at one point this week said it might be 30 hours in the queue. That's clearly not the case, when actually the queue is as bare as this. So really, it's looking at 6 or 7 hours, which was what it was when we were at the South Bank yesterday, which just shows you, which is about 2 miles from here. So really, on paper, the queue sounds a lot bigger than it actually is.
Thank you, Matthew. You are both the most hard-working member of our team, but also the most courageous, because I see every time you stop somebody, they're losing their place in the queue. But anyway, thank you so much.
It takes some doing.
OK, let's take a look now at the current length of the queue to get into Westminster Hall. We can see that queue is estimated to be more than 4 miles long. The nearest landmark is Tower Bridge. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can watch a live stream of the Queen's lying in state in full on the Sky News website and your mobile apps. Meanwhile, in Sandringham, people who came to lay flowers were greeted by the Prince and Princess of Wales. Prince William spoke to one mourner and opened up about his own feelings about what it was like to walk behind the Queen's coffin. Sky's John Sparks reports on a grandson's sorrow.
They came with sunflowers and chrysanthemums and notes of condolence and carried them down to the entrance of the Sandringham estate, a place the royal family knows well. The Queen came here for Christmas, and the Prince and Princess of Wales own a house on the estate. And when they arrived to greet well-wishers, well, it may have felt like coming home. They looked at the flowers now enveloping the front gate, then spoke to dozens of people who journeyed to North Norfolk to see them. The mood was neighbourly, and Prince William was willing to share.
Doing the walk yesterday was challenging. Back a few memories. It's done these moments.
You kind of think to yourself, I've prepared for this, but I'm not that prepared, he said, comparing the procession of the late Queen's coffin to Westminster Hall to his experience at the funeral of his mother, Princess Diana, 25 years ago. It was a startling expression of openness, but it seemed in keeping with this event, for there were other moments of warmth and emotion. When a schoolgirl called Elizabeth presented the Princess of Wales with a toy, Kate came up with another plan.
Wales, and I went with her to put the flowers on the corgi down.
Do you remember what she said to you?
She said, where do you think we should lay the flowers? And I said, let's put them there.
She's overwhelmed by it. It's just an incredible experience. She's been very upset about the Queen passing, and it was lovely for her to see.
The Sandringham estate is much like Balmoral, a place of peace and some privacy for the royal family, but its famous chapel makes an annual appearance. Queen Elizabeth came here to worship on Christmas Day, and it won't be the same without her.
To not see the Queen at 3 o'clock on Christmas Day will just be whatever. For my whole life, that's what I've seen, and we've always sat down at 3 to do that, so it'd be very strange.
Open and relatable, Prince William has revealed something of himself at Sandringham, as the royal family commemorates the past and plans for the future. John Sparks, Sky News at Sandringham.
More details are emerging about the Queen's state funeral due to take place next Monday, 19th of September. 2,000 people, including world leaders and foreign royals, will gather inside Westminster Abbey for the final farewell. Buckingham Palace says the service at Westminster Abbey will be an extraordinary tribute to her, the Queen's remarkable 70-year reign and life of duty. Sky's royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, reports on the state funeral.
It was an event the Queen was personally involved in planning. On Monday, we'll see the full spectacle of her state funeral play out in central London. Rehearsals already taking place, timing everything to precision. At 10:35 on Monday morning, the bearer party will begin to move the Queen's coffin from Westminster Hall to the gun carriage. The King, the Queen's children and grandchildren will all walk behind in a procession to Westminster Abbey. At 11 a.m, the funeral service will begin. 11:55, the funeral will end with a 2-minute silence. At 12:15, the procession will leave the Abbey, making its way through central London. And then at 1 o'clock, the coffin will be moved from the gun carriage to the state hearse and driven to Windsor Castle. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the committal service will be held in St George's Chapel, before at 7:30 in the evening, a private service will take place, where the Queen will be buried alongside the Duke of Edinburgh in the King George VI Chapel.
I think this is bigger than George VI, bigger than George V, bigger than Victoria. So I wait to be convinced that there will ever have been a bigger event, and truly the biggest collection of world leaders in the 21st century.
Among the military pageantry, the personal. The King and his siblings will again stage a vigil by her coffin on Friday night, this time at Westminster Hall. And her grandchildren will join them to walk in the funeral procession. The Queen's own piper will play the lament at Windsor, as just like her husband, Prince Philip, this time her coffin will be lowered into the vault before privately being buried beside him. For so many decades, it was the Queen and Prince Philip who would welcome dignitaries to this part of London for any big events. Of course, this time it's down to the Queen's children and grandchildren, who you get the sense also really want to make sure that everything we're going to see here on Monday also feels open to everyone. And that's why you'll see representatives from the NHS in the procession and members of the Queen's charities in the congregation. We know they have been comforted by the public reaction. The Queen's daughter-in-law, the Countess of Wessex, saying thank you, along with her husband, Prince Edward, in Manchester. Their help now is invaluable to the new king, who, having signed off the funeral plans, now has more duties ahead, including a state event at Buckingham Palace on Sunday, hosting all of the world leaders. Just 24 hours before he says his own final farewell to his beloved mother. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, in central London.
Let's speak now to someone who's integral to the Queen's funeral. Lieutenant Commander Mike Quinn is captain of the Royal Navy Guard for the Tri-Service Guard of Honour. He's in Portsmouth and we can speak to him now. Good evening, Commander Quinn.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining us. Could you explain for us exactly what the Guard of Honour's role is here?
Yes, so we've actually already been involved in part of the parade as we are stationed outside the in Parliament Square, outside the gates where the gun carriage pulled by King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery went in yesterday, preceding the line in state. And we will conduct royal salutes for members of the royal family, the King and the funeral procession. And then we will be there on Monday, again in the same position, conducting royal salutes as the gun carriage pulled by the Royal Navy will move from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey.
And you will be leading the Navy contingent in that Tri-Service Guard, as I understand it?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you tell us, one of the things that I think viewers would be interested to know, because we did see that guard yesterday, I think some viewers would be interested to know, how are the soldiers and sailors and airmen selected? Is it from a particular unit, or is there some other way of deciding who gets that honour?
There's people from a broad variety of units involved. For instance, I work within Navy Command in Future Training based in Abbey Wood. We have personnel who are from very many different parts of the Navy, and we have quite a large number of personnel who are really at very early stages in their naval careers. Some of them maybe 3 or 4 months out of basic training, and are currently, or fairly recently, been conducting training at HMS Collingwood and other training establishments. So there really is a broad variety of sort of units and backgrounds to the members of both the Guard within the Tri-Service Guard of Honour, and also pulling the gun carriage and street lining.
Yes, I was taken by the fact that so many of them looked so very young. I understand that some of the service men and women in the Guard of Honour have very recently been on active service abroad.
Yes, absolutely. The Royal Navy is deployed globally. Personnel involved have come from ships and establishments across the Navy, and yes, we have very many people who've seen service away on ships and submarines with in air stations and all over the world.
You can, of course, practice. You can drill. No doubt they would not be selected if they didn't know how to manage the actual ceremonials. But I suspect that particularly for the younger service people, there will be an emotional weight to this. How will you prepare them for that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very emotional for everybody involved, not just the more junior members, but we are pretty experienced at conducting state ceremonial events. We've got an excellent state ceremonial training team, and a combination of the experience within those trainers, the experience within the senior eights and officers within the Guard and across the Royal Navy team involved. We're doing our best to look after all involved, and I could say 100% everybody is extremely proud to be supporting our service of 30,000 plus on the streets of London. But ultimately, it's about practicing the drills, making sure that they're comfortable with that. And we are conducting rehearsals. We've obviously conducted an early morning rehearsal, and then the initial part of the process that leads up to the funeral with the transition to the lying in state. So the opportunity to practice is a major one, because the scale of the parade it can be sort of quite intimidating, but they will have seen that, and there were people, of course, members of the public, on the streets for the practices as well.
Commander Quinn, if I could just ask you very quickly, we've only got a few seconds, and this is sort of more a personal question as a former cadet myself. I watched the whole of the 38 minutes march from to Westminster Hall, and I didn't see anybody miss a step. Did I get it wrong?
No.
That was remarkable.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it went very well. The Guard from all three services looked excellent on parade.
Commander Quinn, thank you so much. The best of luck for the next few days and, of course, for Monday.
Thank you.
Now, from what we do for work, how many children we have, where we get our energy from, the Elizabethan era spanned 70 years. And during that time, we've witnessed huge changes in population, employment, wealth, the role of women. Ed Conway's been looking back at how Elizabeth's reign will be remembered.
70 years, the longest reign of any British monarch. And it is hard to think of another period where the country has changed quite so much, culturally, socially, economically. And one of the best ways of seeing those changes over time is through charts. Let me give you an example. Over the Queen's reign, the UK population grew by 17 million. But that rise actually happened in two stages, or ages. And these bars show you population growth. So anything above the line is the population growing. In the 50s and 60s, look, you can see a big increase in UK-born members of the population. Those are the black bars. But now I'm going to bring on the impact of migration. Look, these lighter purple bars, they show people leaving the country en masse in the 60s and the 70s. That was the brain drain. And from the 90s onwards, look, you can see it is most of the population growth comes from immigration. That really shows you a massive shift. Or another way of looking at the same story. If you look at the number of children born on average to each woman, the total fertility rate, in 1952 it was 2.2 children per woman. Look at that line there. Then that goes up. That's the baby boom there. You can see about 3 children per woman. But today it's come all the way down to 1.6 children per woman. That's the lowest level on record and well below the replacement rate, that dotted line there. That's the rate at which the population can sustain its size in the long run without immigration.
What about this, ladies, for cutting bread in a hurry when those hungry youngsters come in for tea?
The upshot is this country's complexion has changed, as too have our lives, both at home and in the workplace, for men and particularly for women. Consider back in 1952, the female participation rate, women in employment, was just 40%. Look at that line there. But by the 2020s, look at it going up. You can see it had risen to over 74%. That was a dramatic change in the workplace. Meanwhile, the percentage of men in employment, look, I'll bring that line on, you can see that line's actually fallen, down from 95% to 84%.
After 19 years, we're free again.
Well, are you glad coal rationing's over? Yes. Why? Because the customers can have more and there'll be plenty of work for us.
And the nature of jobs has changed too. Look, this shows you where people work. And you can see in the 1950s, about 47% of people worked in primary and secondary jobs. This is getting stuff out of the ground or making things with that stuff. By the early 2000s, look at how things have changed. It's down to 16%. More than 80% of us work in that light purple segment, services. These are big shifts, but we're just scratching the surface. It's hard to think of another period where the country and economy has changed quite so much. This story is sometimes told as a tale of decline, but I think that's oversimplification. Have a look at, of all the measures, perhaps the most important when it comes to how well off we are. This is GDP per capita. And have a look at how this has changed. It's measured in dollars so that we can compare it with across different countries around the world. And the UK, look, there it is in 1952. Compared with the rest of the leading industrialised nations, the UK was upper middle of that pack. But look at what happened then. All countries got better off over time. Look at the bars. They're all going up, so everyone's getting better off. But the UK is getting better off slightly less quickly than the rest. So it fell down on that particular leaderboard, but got considerably wealthier at the same time. Is that decline? Maybe. But one place you can certainly see decline is the value of the currency. The pound sterling, which, of course, bore the Queen's image, versus a basket of other currencies, the pound has weakened considerably since 1952. One devaluation after another, from the pound-in-your-pocket Wilson moment of 1967 through to the IMF bailout of 1976. You've got Black Wednesday in 1992, the financial crisis in 2008, and, of course, the EU referendum. Each of these seismic moments pushing the pound gradually weaker.
We have been warned, but smoke still comes from many factory chimneys, while from the open fires of houses the evil pours in even greater volume.
But something else happened too. It's easy to forget that as the Queen began her reign, this industrial powerhouse was still pumping out vast quantities of sulphur and carbon into the skies. As it deindustrialised, that began to change. For evidence, consider where we got our power from, electricity. Back in 1952, look, you can see the components of where our electricity comes from. 1952, there's coal. 96% of our power came from burning coal. But just look over time about how that has changed. You can see, getting on to the 2020s, look, different colours are coming along. Look at that black slice for one thing. Coal down to just 3% by 2021. 3%. As you probably know now, the main fuel is gas. That blue slice there, 41% of our power comes from gas, but an ever-increasing proportion comes from renewables like wind and solar. That's 13% and rising.
Down the long, broad avenue of the Mall towards the Admiralty Arch, the Queen's procession moves slowly onward through the crowds of cheering people who waited to show their loyalty and their affection.
Her Majesty's reign began in a dirtier, more polluted, more industrialised country. It ends in one which is transformed. Cleaner, healthier, longer lived, more diverse and more equal. Where the quality of life may not be the best in the world, but it is much, much improved on decades gone by.
Ed Conway. Let's take a look at what is in store over the coming days. Now, the Queen's lying in state will continue until the morning of the funeral on Monday. Tomorrow, the King and Queen consort will travel to Cardiff, where they'll attend a prayer service and meet the Welsh First Minister. On Sunday evening, the night before the funeral, King Charles will host a reception for the foreign dignitaries who are attending that funeral. A minute of silence will also be held across the UK at 8 o'clock in the evening to honour the Queen. Then, on the morning of Monday the 19th of September, the lying in state ends, and the Queen's coffin will be taken in procession to Westminster Abbey for her state funeral. World leaders have begun their journey to Britain for the Queen's funeral. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, left Sydney this afternoon on his long journey to London. At the request of the Queen, he will attend the funeral along with 10 Australians who have been recognised for their contribution to society. Now, let's speak now to Kim Hughes, who was awarded the George Cross for his service in Afghanistan, where he risked his life defusing bombs. He'll be attending the funeral on Monday. Good evening, Kim. Thanks for joining us. I wonder if you could first explain what you did to earn this extraordinary honour.
I was fortunate enough to be part of a bomb disposal team in Afghanistan during Operation Herrick 9. And essentially, I was a bomb disposal operator, and my task was to render safe improvised explosive devices. And fortunately enough, on that day for the act, I was recognised, but it was also my team that was recognised for rendering safe IEDs.
When you say fortunately, but presumably, I mean, how many of these devices would you have had to deal with over the time your tour?
I mean, it varies where you are and what you're doing out on the ground, but a bomb disposal operator in a 6-month operational tour of duty, certainly in Afghanistan, could look anywhere up to 70, 80, over 100 IEDs.
And presumably these are not always done in ideal circumstances where you yourself are safe and there's no possibility of enemy fire and all of that.
You know, every scenario is different. Every bomb disposal operator has faced occasions when they have been under fire, when there have been circumstances that put both them and their team in extreme risk. But essentially, that was the job that we were doing over that period of time, and that's the risks that we took.
You were awarded your George Cross by the late Queen herself. What was the experience like?
You know, it was an absolutely phenomenal day. The Queen was fantastic, very much well informed about what I had done, what my team had done. She knew elements of my life I really didn't know that she would, and very, very good at putting people at ease. Such a nice, gentle person.
They say quite frequently that when you meet her, she, you know, the caricature is she says to everybody, how far have you come and so on. But they say that she's, as you say, very well informed about you and about the things that you do. And we do know that she had a very close relationship with the armed services. Did you feel that you were actually talking to a commander-in-chief who was more than just a uniform, as it were?
You know, I said she puts you very much at ease, and the fact that she knows how to talk to you, how to engage with you. I mean, she essentially was my boss for 23 years. You know, she was the sovereign, she was the head of the armed forces, and completely took me off my guard when she was talking about, you know, bomb disposal operators in Afghanistan. She understood that there was, you know, we were a limited commodity over that period.
When you say a limited commodity, what exactly do you mean by that?
There wasn't very many of us.
Okay.
And
during the period, there were fewer of you.
And absolutely, it was, you know, you can't just become a bomb disposal operator overnight. There is a lot of training involved, and they obviously will not reduce the standard required to operate in that environment. So she was very, very well up to date with current affairs in the armed forces, and she spoke very honestly and openly about it.
A number of the servicemen and women who've spoken since last week have said the same thing that you've just said, that she was the boss, the sense that you were doing what you were doing for her. In your particular case, I guess on a daily basis, knowing that you might not see the end of the day. How do you think that relationship will feed into your feelings on Monday when you will be present at that last ceremony?
You know, I think everyone has reflected since the Queen passed away, and I think during Monday, certainly when I'm going to be at the funeral, I think that I will have my own reflection of my time spent in the armed forces and the times where I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to spend time with Her Majesty the Queen, and I think everyone will do that in their own way.
But you and I guess the team that you have worked with will presumably be feeling it very strongly at the moment. What do you think that this relationship between her and the men and women who risk their lives means to you and to the nation?
I think certainly from an armed forces perspective, when you join the armed forces, whether that's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, you sign the oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen. So you have a very personal, immediate bond with the Queen. You're joining the Army because it's something you believe in, it's something you want to do, it's something you're very passionate about. And I think every man and woman in the armed forces will have their own view on that and their own feeling, and not just within the armed forces, within everything, within our first responders, within our NHS. You know, looking at over the period of COVID where the Queen gave the George Cross to the NHS for the outstanding work that those guys and girls have done. I think across the board and the entire nation are feeling it. They really are, and everyone will be feeling it differently.
We have seen in the last few days, of course, the royal family, the Queen's daughter and her sons, in uniform, and certainly in two of their cases, that has been more than a ceremonial. Two of them, Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, have seen active service, as did Her Majesty's late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. So this is a service family. Is that, do you think, part of what created this close link with the uniformed services, do you think?
I think it certainly helps when you know that members of the royal family have engaged in combat and have served their country, as opposed to someone that stood in front of you that essentially hasn't. And I think that is key when certainly the younger members of the armed forces are looking upwards and looking at who our leaders are and looking at the monarchy. And I think that is fundamental, absolutely fundamental. And what it does is it just grows strength.
Of course, the new Prince of Wales has also been in service and has flown rescue helicopters and so on. Do you think that relationship is going to transfer itself to the new king and to his family?
I truly do. You know, lead by example, absolutely. And, you know, the king has pledged his life to this country, along with the Prince of Wales, you know, and I truly believe that their family, their children will follow in their footsteps.
If you, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to speak to any member of the royal family, but if you had the opportunity to speak to King, Prince of Wales, about your feelings at this moment and as we go through to Monday, what would you and your colleagues, your comrades, want to say to him about his mother and your hopes for his reign?
I mean, there is struggle to say the words to someone that has lost so much. You know, as a country, we have lost a queen. The king has lost a mother. You know, condolences, absolutely. But there's only so much one can say. But to truly offer him the best of luck in the future, I'm very fortunate I have spent time with the king. And he is equally a phenomenal person, and I truly think he will grasp it with both hands, and we can only offer him the best of luck.
Kim Hughes, thank you very much indeed, and thank you, as Americans would say, thank you for your service. Now, the King is the head of state for 14 Commonwealth realms, but the monarchy's future role in some of these countries appears less certain after the Queen's death. Last November, Barbados became a republic, replacing the monarch with a president as head of state, and there's since been speculation that other Caribbean countries could follow suit. Martha Kellner reports on a possible road to a republic.
Ready? Gentlemen, stay focused. Stay tall, boys.
In Jamaica, sprinting is part of the national identity. The medals on the world stage are punctuation of true independence. For these young men, their kings and queens are on the track. The monarchy, on the other hand, faces an uncertain future here.
Of course, you look forward to what's coming new, and I look forward to seeing what King Charles will do differently than his mother did.
Do you think that Jamaica should hold a referendum on becoming a republic?
I think there should. I think that there's a trend right now with the bigger Caribbean countries, Barbados and Trinidad, both becoming republics. Jamaica is ready for republicism.
A visit by the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge to Jamaica earlier this year was marked by calls for an apology for slavery. And polls suggest over half of Jamaicans want to break away from the monarchy. And the country's Prime Minister is under pressure to put the choice to the people. Afternoon, Prime Minister. Will you be holding a referendum on Jamaica becoming a republic, sir? The ties to the monarchy, particularly in the capital, Kingston, run deep. And for an older generation which cherishes tradition, the death of the Queen marks the sad end of an era.
I am the first one crying in Jamaica. Because she's just a human being like everybody, and I love her so much. The best of Jamaica was back in the 60s, when we'd have a lot of connection with England. That was the best of Jamaica.
Others believe the days of the monarchy in the Caribbean could be numbered.
It was just like, okay, it's sad, but what's next? We know what is King Charles III going to bring to the table.
Historian Alexis is an expert in the country's colonial past. Do people here feel like there's been a meaningful apology for slavery?
Oh, definitely not. There's never been to us an apology.
Yeah.
You know, there's sort of like kind of apologies and roundabout apologies, but not a real sincere apology for the atrocities of our former enslaved African ancestors.
Does that need to come from the royal family before?
Yes, it needs to come from the royal family and the British government, both hopefully at the same time.
Complex challenges in the Commonwealth lie ahead for the new king. This Jamaica is evolving and its views are too. An island which may well choose to cut itself adrift from old institutions. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Kingston, Jamaica.
We're told that King Charles is having a private day of reflection at Highgrove today, his personal home, but members of his family have been out to see tributes to the Queen across the country. The Earl and Countess of Wessex have been in Manchester, meeting people who've come to pay their respects to the Queen. They visited Manchester Central Library to sign the council's books of condolence. And the Countess was seen emotionally hugging a young boy in the crowd during the visit as she and Prince Edward viewed tributes in the city. Tens of thousands of people continue to come to London, making a pilgrimage to see the Queen lying in state, all with their own reasons for doing so. The former Prime Minister, Theresa May, and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, were amongst those paying their respects today. And we've just seen the Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, in the past few minutes. At the front of the queue at the Palace of Westminster, there is airport-style security. The queue then winds its way back through Victoria Tower Gardens on the embankment and across Lambeth Bridge. For those who require it, an accessible route is available starting at Tate Britain. where timed entry slots are issued. On the opposite side of the River Thames, the queue stretches along the South Bank, past the London Eye and Tate Modern, downriver to London Bridge. The queue will reach its maximum permitted length at Southwark Park in Bermondsey. Officials estimate 350,000 people will be able to view the Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall. Now, when we look at these huge lines of people, whether on the TV or in person, it's easy to assume that everyone's come to pay their respects to the Queen. The impression is one of a nation almost completely united in grief. But inevitably, it's never that simple. I'm joined now by Stephen Reicher, who's a professor of social psychology at St Andrews University. Good evening, Steve.
Hello, Trevor.
Thank you so much for joining us. Steve, let's start with what do you think brings people out for an occasion like this? And, you know, these days they can watch it on television, they can see it in their phones, they can hear about it and so on. Why do they physically need to be out here?
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. It's quite an ordeal, isn't it, having to queue up for several hours, 8, 9, 10 hours in the cold overnight. And it's easy to assume that everyone who's there must be a dedicated royalist. But equally, as you say, it's actually much more complicated than that. There are a variety of motives. I mean, some people obviously are royalists. They define themselves as British. They see the Queen as the embodiment of Britishness. And therefore, the death of the Queen is quite literally the loss of a certain part of themselves. And they feel it deeply, they mourn. And what's more, as in with any pilgrimage, the fact that it's difficult, that it's an ordeal, actually is part of the experience, because what you're doing is you are affirming your identity by going through this ritual. And the more difficult it is, the more meaningful it is. So in a sense, it's not that people are in line despite the fact it's grueling. The fact it's grueling is part of the meaning of it. Now, that's some...
Indeed. In fact, people were saying to us yesterday, you know, she's given 70 years of her life. I can give a few hours.
Absolutely. Now, for other people, I mean, the monarchy is, in a sense, like a soap opera. It's a screen on which we project and can discuss our own lives, our own issues, our own dilemmas. And therefore, the death of the Queen, the death of a mother, invokes the death of our own mothers, of those close to us. And so, in many ways, people have grief because they're reminded of very meaningful moments in their own personal lives. They're not so much mourning for the Queen as mourning through the Queen. But then there are very many people who want to be part of this because it's history. It's a highly significant event. And being part of it gives significance to them. They can say, I was there. They can tell other people they were there. There's a little bit of stardust sprinkled on them. But also, and on top of that, it confers upon them a certain amount of immortality, if you like. They're part of history. They were there. And whenever it comes up on the television in the future, perhaps even after they're dead, they are part of history. So there are a very large variety of motives, and it's wrong to assume that everyone who's there is a royalist, and it's wrong to assume that everybody is there in respect, united in grief, or whatever. And I think the danger is that we come to false conclusions about the nature of our society, or even worse, we begin to enforce narrow notions of our society. Because if you assume that the crowd is united in monarchism, in acceptance of the institution, and if you also believe that the crowd represents the nation, then you come to the conclusion that anybody who is not united in grief isn't really part of the nation, is excluded from the nation. And so certain things begin to be unsayable. It's hard to dissent. It's hard to question monarchism. It's hard to question issues of colonialism. And I think there is a danger of creating a narrow view of our society in which a plurality of voices cannot be heard and certain things cannot be spoken.
I want to come back to that wider point in a second, but I saw in an article that you'd written that you reflected on the way that this moment had, if you like, stirred up your own memories of relatives passing, I'm sure that there's a psychologist's word for this. Do you think that that is something that's going on across the country, that people are sort of... This has provoked, if you like, a memory of sorrow for them, which is to do with their own lives?
Well, absolutely. I mean, so for me, yes, when the Queen died, it made me think about when my mother died. And I remember my mum lived in London. I was coming down on a train to see her. I was told she was very ill, and she died before I got there. And so I felt for Harry, who got there too late as well. There was an interesting poll which showed that 44% of British people shed a tear about the Queen. But the assumption was, what that meant was they were all royalists, that they were all shedding a tear because they were invested in the Queen. Now, things are much more complex than that, and therefore I think we need to be careful of how we interpret the genuine grief and the genuine sorrow that many people had, myself included, as indicating, if you like, a certain accepting certain views about society, buying into certain notions of how we should be ruled and so on. Because if we do that, and I think, as I say, what we do is we begin not just not to reflect society, but to begin to say that only certain views are acceptable in society. And I think that would be both a misuse of the evidence, but also something which I don't think is particularly good for a plural society and an open society.
Just very briefly, Steve, we've got about 30 seconds. One of the things that struck me is that actually there's been a sort of evolution of some what you might call popular rituals, the silence, the applause, the flowers and so on, which aren't organised, they're just what people are doing. Is that something new for us?
No, I mean, well, first of all, I think the important thing about these rituals is they bring together the personal and the political. They are deeply felt. There are deep and meaningful emotions here. But always, rituals, commemorations of this sort are ways of creating a national identity, a way of defining who we are and what's acceptable in our society. And that's what we're seeing today. It's not just history. What we're seeing is the making of history. And that's why it's so fascinating and so important.
I would love to talk more about that, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Steve, thank you so much for that.
Talk to you, Trevor.
News at 10 is next. But first, let's look back at another emotional day as the royal family joined people across the country as they pay their respects.